finally remember to do that on time. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining Halton Food for Halton Garden Week 2023, day 2. We've had lots of interesting speakers so far. I see a lot of familiar names, so people have been tuning into many of the talks. So thank you very much, and a lot more to come. So thank you. My name is Helen Stephenson. I am the program manager of Halton Food, which is a proud program of Halton Environmental Network. So before I introduce our next speaker, I would like to thank our sponsors, without whom we would not be able to have these presentations. So thank you to Dillon Consulting, Cedar Planters, Irrigatia.ca, the Oakville Horticultural Society, and the North American Native Plant Society. To find out about more of these companies or societies, please visit our Halton Garden Week website. So please join me in welcoming Mary Ann Bell from Oakvillegreen. Mary Ann is the education coordinator for Oakvillegreen. She is currently leading their rain garden project, which involves running a blended course on how to install your very own rain garden. Mary Ann is originally from the UK, the land of the rain. But since arriving in 2020, she has fallen in love with Canada and its great outdoors. She has a background in environmental science and is passionate about reconnecting people of all ages to nature through education and immersive experiences. So thank you very much for joining us today, Mary Ann, and discussing rain gardens.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. So welcome everybody. I'd just like to say that obviously rain gardens is a very large topic. So what I'm going to do today is kind of give you a very sort of detailed but quick overview of what rain gardens are, why we should try and increase the number of them, and how we can go about doing that sort of in a very quick 1-hour presentation. So just really quickly, what I'd love to know from you guys is on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being absolutely 0 and 10 being professional rain gardener, what would you say is your knowledge of rain gardens? So if you are able to, and if you can put a number in the chat, it would be great to see sort of what people know already about rain gardens. So I'll just give you like a minute or so to write your answers, 1 being 0 and 10 being professional landscaper. Okay. Okay. So it looks like some of you have no knowledge, some of you maybe have heard of them, but are not exactly quite sure what they're about. Okay, so hopefully this presentation will prove useful to you. I'll go ahead, and I'm sure Helen's probably allotted some time at the end if you have any questions. And if there's something that I haven't covered, then feel free to put questions in the chat. So let's get started. Okay, so before we can start to think about rain gardens, we actually have to think about sort of the way our landscape has changed and how these changes in our landscape are actually having a dramatic impact on the way the water is flowing through the water cycle and through just in general over the land. So if we think about it, what happens when it rains? In a natural area, when it rains, most of the rainwater is absorbed. Pretty much about 50% of the rainwater is absorbed through the ground, through the roots, through the plants. They basically act as like a huge sponge. Trees are an incredible asset when you're talking about absorbing water. They can absorb huge amounts of water and really slow down the volume of rainwater that is getting to sort of the nearby streams, creeks, rivers, and lakes. Also, a lot of water will evapotranspire from leaves and vegetation. And really, there's very little runoff. About 10% would be runoff. But now what we're seeing, especially where I am at the moment in Oakville, is a change, and not such a gradual change, from green infrastructure to gray infrastructure. So obviously there's a lot more building developments, and our once pervious surfaces are now becoming impervious. So we're talking about driveways, pavements, rooftops, parking lots. And so this has really greatly changed the land's ability to absorb rainwater. So we've essentially kind of flipped it. So now 55% of rainwater is actually runoff. A mere 15% is actually absorbed into the ground. That might be from lawns or urban parks, and 35% approximately is evapotranspiration. So one of the major issues with the flip is that you have now a huge amount of water going directly to the streams, to the waterways, to the lakes. And these streams are not prepared for that huge amount of water. So you see a lot of erosion of streams, a lot of widening of streams. Also, this water is not just running off our surfaces clean and wonderfully to our aquatic nearby waterways. It's actually carrying a lot of contaminants. So if we just think about the water that runs off our drives, it's probably picking up anything from our cars. So that might be brake pad fluid, oil. At the moment, it's probably salt as well. It will also, as it runs down the roads, it will pick up cigarette butts, fertilizer, pesticides, anything that's maybe over applied on our gardens, garden waste, sediment, dog waste. So all of these things are just kind of being picked up by the runoff and just carried directly into the stormwater drains, and that goes straight to our waterways. So we've got a larger amount, dirtier amount of water, and it's happening at a faster rate because we've got nothing slowing it down. So what's the result? The result is beach closures. The result is eutrophication. So because of the huge amount of nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen in the water, you get these huge algal blooms, which when they die and decompose, basically suck all the oxygen from the water, making it inhabitable for other aquatic creatures. As I mentioned, you've got increased erosion. You've got increased risk of flood because the land is simply not absorbing the water. You've also got, well, negative impacts on aquatic biodiversity. You've also got lack of sort of the actual underground water stores. So I don't know if many of you, last year we had an incredibly dry summer and a lot of people talked about wells drying up. This is because we're not allowing the water to come naturally, filter into the soil, into the ground, and sort of recharge our aquifers. So this is causing a huge problem. So rain gardens, how can they be the solution? And first of all, what is a rain garden? I'm not sure if this bar is blocking things. You can tell me if it is or not. Okay, so what is exactly a rain garden? So this is a sort of standard definition that they've created. A rain garden has a dual functionality, because not only does it collect rainwater that falls on it naturally, but it can also be used to collect rainwater that's being directed to it from, for example, something like a downspout. So what is it? It's a landscaped feature, okay, that will replace an area of your lawn or an area of your garden that you know, previously had nothing there. And what it does is it's collects stormwater or rainwater or melted snow that runs off your grass or your roof or your driveway or comes out of your downspout in a shallow depression. Okay, and it holds it there long enough for the soil to start to absorb and naturally filter this water. Okay, now in the definition it says it prevents it from entering the storm drain. The presence of a rain garden will greatly reduce the amount of water reaching the storm drain, but of course if there is a very heavy rainfall there will be some water entering the storm drain, but that is what the purpose of the storm drain is there for. So if we have a look a bit closer at a rain garden, so we said it's a shallow depression. So by shallow, I'm not talking about a lake or a pond or, you know, a swimming pool. I'm talking about 3 to 12 inches. Okay, so it's really not, you know, once the plants are growing, it's barely noticeable really. The plants, they're not just any plants, they are native plants that are used to the soil conditions and the climatic conditions of the region. They're also generally plants that have very long and complex root systems. And this sort of network of root systems is incredibly important for the function of the rain garden, because as the roots grow and then die and decompose, they leave spaces in the soil, and that then improves the soil's ability to absorb water and its filtration rate. Also, the microbes that are present in these root systems help break down the contaminants and pollutants that are present in the rainwater that's washed off from your roofs and your drives. So the rain garden is holding the water, giving it time, slowing it down and allowing it to be absorbed into the soil, but it's also cleaning it. Okay, so that when the water does eventually through the groundwater systems reach a nearby stream or creek, it will be much more controllable volume and speed, but it will also be cleaner. Another thing to remember, a lot of these diagrams are often a bit misconceiving because it looks like the water is always there. The water ideally should drain within 24 hours. It may be a little bit more if you have slow draining soil, but this is not going to be constantly full of water. So that's kind of all the cool things that are going on underneath, but above, you've also got a great pollinator habitat. A lot of the plants that are used for rain gardens are incredibly sort of important for native pollinators and really help increase biodiversity in your garden and in your neighborhood. So it's really, you know, a win-win situation from above ground or below ground. So let's have a look at an example of a rain garden that is basically in action. So what you can see from this top picture is this is a very typical situation. This house has a downspout that is coming down the front of the house by the garage door, and the downspout basically just kicks out onto the drive. Okay, so any rainwater that falls onto this roof goes down the downspout, straight down the drive and into the nearby storm drain. And as it does that, it picks up anything that's on the drive. So salt, brake fluid, oil, garden waste, whatever has blown onto this person's drive. So what this person actually did was they diverted the downspout and actually made it come into what you can see there is the lawn. And they've created this rain garden at the bottom of their lawn. So now the water is redirected. It's being given time to absorb into the land. It's being cleaned and filtered. And if there is an incredibly, heavy rainstorm, then yes, some of it might overflow into the storm drain. But what this gentleman has done is greatly reduce the amount of water that's actually washing off his property, and he's actually capturing it where it lands and harvesting the rainwater. So what is the rain garden doing as well? It's also solving an issue, because this gentleman actually had a very icy driveway. So when this water kind of pooled on his driveway, or was just kind of flowing over the driveway in very cold conditions, it caused a hazard with icy conditions. And in addition, he's planted a lot of plants that are great for attracting butterflies. So he's really created a great hotspot for butterflies in his neighborhood. So this is one example of really how rain gardens can function. So you are thinking of doing a rain garden. What are the steps? So the first thing you need to do is really understand what happens on your property when it rains. And you need to be thinking about following that raindrop, or we also like to call the tour de downspout. So as you can see, this is actually our course participants going around the Joshua Creek Heritage Arts Center, where we're planning to build a demo rain garden. And we're looking at all the various downspouts and discussing which ones would be good places to install a rain garden. So when you're doing your tour, you really want to be looking for poo, as ridiculous as that sounds. So you want to be looking for problems, obstacles, and opportunities. Okay, so by problems, so perhaps you have a downspout that kicks out straight onto your driveway, or maybe it kicks out onto a nearby public walkway, and in the winter it's just an ice rink. It's 3 inches of ice and you have to chip away at it, and it's a hazard, it's annoying. That would be something that perhaps could be solved by a rain garden. Perhaps you have a downspout and then the water just kind of pools right next to your house or near the foundations. That's not ideal. And you want to be able to pull that water away from your house. A rain garden could perhaps solve that problem. Another thing you may have is a particular area of your garden that just seems to always be muddy and just pool water. That's another sort of problem that could be solved by a rain garden. Or maybe you have sort of an erosion path, like whenever it rains, the water just goes through your lawn in a particular way and nothing grows there, and it's just all like kind of a muddy trench. That's another problem that could be solved by rain gardens. It's kind of interesting to think a rain garden actually makes a dry place wetter and a wet place drier. Yeah, got that one right. So if you actually also have a very dry area in your garden, it could be that you're just, your land is not retaining water, and the rain garden could actually help you also with that. Obstacles. So unless you're incredibly lucky and you have lots of space, and there will be obstacles, but that doesn't mean you can't have a rain garden. Major obstacles that you need to be thinking about: if you are in sort of an older neighborhood, you might have mature trees. So you need to be thinking about their roots. You certainly don't want to, disturb any major root systems. That being said, I have seen some rain gardens that have incorporated tree roots into their design, and it really does, add something unique to the rain garden. Another big thing that you have to be thinking about are utilities. Due to the depth that you're going to be going to, you shouldn't really be hitting big utilities like gas, water, but you could possibly be affecting perhaps internet. So it's definitely important to, and it's in fact the law, to contact Ontario One Call to make sure that you're aware of where your utilities are before you start any sort of digging. Another thing that may be an obstacle is a walkway. So maybe your downspout comes down the side of your garage, but you want your garden on the lawn, which is on the other side of your walkway. So you need to figure out how to get the water to your rain garden. It's an obstacle, but it's an obstacle that can be easily overcome. There are several ways you can do it. You can either go under the walkway, you can go through the walkway. You can use things such as sort of catch basins that will catch the water in one place and bring it out under a pipe somewhere else in the rain garden. I've seen people use sort of like trellises to take the downspout over the walkway. There are many inventive ways to make that water get to your rain garden. The other thing to look for is opportunities. So do you have a bit of land on your property that's looking a bit drab and you'd love to turn that into, you know, a beautiful pollinator garden / rain garden? Why not? Can you combine? So can you get a garden that's going to take the water coming from your roof and the water coming from your drive? You know, if there is potential to absorb as much water from your property as possible, then that's even better. So that's the first thing. Really familiarize yourself with your property, what rainwater does when it hits your property, and look for the poo. Look for the problems, the obstacles, and the opportunities. So next up, step 2, you need to get to know your soil. So to ensure that your rain garden is as successful as it can be, you should really get to know your soil. So this includes whether it's acidic or alkali, how quickly it drains, and also its composition. So if you're an avid gardener, you probably have a good idea of what your soil is like and what things grow and don't grow. But these tests are kind of fun to do. They're very easy to do. They're great to involve kids, grandkids with, and you might find some interesting results. A lot of people on our rain garden course came thinking, oh, I have clay, it's the end of the world. And clay is not just clay. There are several there's a range of clay, okay? So things like the jar test, where you put a sample of soil, mix it with water, shake it up, and let the different components settle, can really demonstrate sort of what composition your soil has. Maybe it has clay. All soils ideally should have an element of clay, but they should also have an element of silt and sand as well. So by doing the jar test, you can really get an idea of how much clay you have. And you may be surprised. You may have clay, but not as much as you thought. The pH test is good to know if you have acidic or alkali, just to also know what plants might be good for your garden, to figure out why certain things work or don't work. It's very easy. There are lots of, litmus paper tests or pH paper tests, often used for swimming pools and things like that. Or you can even do sort of homemade tests with bicarbonate of soda or vinegar that can give you sort of an indication. The most important test, however, is the percolation test. And this is the test that's going to tell you how well your soil filters, okay? So maybe you kind of know your soil. You're like, okay, yeah, I have clay soil, but maybe you've got fairly well draining clay soil because you've got a good amount of topsoil and you've been planting a lot of things in your garden. You've got already a good root system. So the percolation test is really one that I would strongly recommend. It's very simple to do. You essentially dig a hole about a shovel's height or deep. You fill it up with water and you let that drain overnight, because you want to do the percolation test with the soil already saturated, okay? Then the next day, you fill it up again to the top. There are different ways you can do it. Some people I've seen will fill it right up to the top and then just use sort of a piece of wood and measure down as the water drops. Other people use like popsicle sticks to mark the different places. And you can measure every hour, you can measure at certain intervals and then calculate the hourly rate. Ideally, if you are lucky, you have good filtering soil and your water is filtering between 1 and 3 inches per hour. If it's less than an inch, then that's poor draining soil. That's not the end of the world. It just means you need to take that into account when designing your rain garden. They consider like a minimum for rain gardens would be 1/4 of an inch per hour. And that really is very slow draining soil. So it's very unlikely that you have that. So those are the tests. Getting to know your soil is kind of key to ensuring the success of your rain garden. Step number 3. So step number 3 is mapping and planning your rain garden. So the biggest rule is the distance from the house. Ideally, you should be at least 10 feet from the house. Okay, this is to ensure that there's no accidental water going back to the house, entering your foundations, flooding your basements, etc. Another thing that's very key with a rain garden is you will have the basin, you'll have the sides, which are called the berms that will allow you to hold the water in. But somewhere along those sides, you need an exit. You need an overflow, just like in a bath. You have that circular thing that allows the water to, if you've left the tap running, the water will go there and not overflow the bath. It's the same concept here. So in a very heavy rainfall, we don't expect the rain garden to take everything in. It will have to overflow, but you want it to overflow where you've planned it to overflow. Okay, and so you want it to overflow on quite a flat area, so you're not causing erosion, and ideally to a nearby storm drain. Other things that you need to consider are obviously the depth and the size, and this is where it comes back to what type of soil you have. Okay, if you have sandy or loamy soil, then you want your rain garden to be 20% of the drainage area. So what do I mean by the drainage area? I mean the area that's technically draining into the rain garden. So in most cases, it would be the section of the roof that is draining into the downspout that is feeding your rain garden. Okay, so you can measure that on Google Earth, or you can go outside and measure it yourself, but it should be 20% of that area. If you have clay soil, then you need to make the rain garden bigger in terms of surface area. So it should be 30% of the area of your roof. These are ideal numbers. Obviously, if you don't have that space, you don't have that space, but these are sort of guidelines that are recommended. The other thing is depth. So if you have slow draining soil, so less than 1 inch per hour, you shouldn't really be going deeper than 6 inches. Okay. If you have fast draining soil, so 1 inch an hour or more, then you can perhaps go anywhere from 6 to 12 inches. Of course, it's entirely up to you, and you perhaps might not want to go that deep if your rain garden is right near a walkway and somebody could like trip, or so you also have to take other things into account, but those are sort of the guidelines. So when you think about it, if you have loamy or sandy soil that drains, you can have your rain garden is going to be more like a cereal bowl shape. Okay, it's going to be deeper and less surface area. Whereas if you have slow draining soil, clay soil, then your rain garden is going to be more like, say, like a pasta bowl. So it's going to be shallower and a larger surface area. So it's not that you can or cannot have rain gardens because of the soil you have. It's just you have to take certain things into consideration in your planning. The other things to think about are whether you want to amend the soil. There's lots of debates about whether you work with what you have or you can actually amend the soil. If you do add amended soil, you obviously have to take that into consideration with your depth, because your ponding depth needs to be from where the inlet pipe or your downspout is coming in down to the bottom. So that could be the top of your amended layer or the top of where you've stopped digging. You also have to think about mulching, and you have to make sure you use the right type of mulch. So really what you want to use is hardwood mulch. And you also want to be considering using what we call double shredded mulch. So it's more likely to knit together and hold, because if you put other types of mulch, what might happen during the first rain is it will float and wash away. And of course, plant the right plants, okay? Because you want to ensure that these plants thrive and get established and start working their magic with their complex root systems. So that's the mapping. So the design. So with the design, we recommend drawing it out. Now, why? Because the rain garden, the way it's designed is it has sections. So you'll have like the basin, which is like the bottom of the bowl, you could say. And that's where plants are going to be submerged part of the time when it does rain. Okay, so you need to select plants that are going to be happy in that sort of condition. The sides are going to be moist, but not as moist as the basin. And then the tops of the berms or the mounds, they're going to be much drier. So you need to be thinking about sort of which plants you're going to have and where in your rain garden you're going to place them. Also be thinking about sort of planting plants in groups so that they make more of an impact. You want to be thinking also about what your rain garden is going to look like throughout the year. Okay, so, you don't just want to go crazy in spring, all beautiful blooms, and then nothing for the rest of the year. You want to ensure that you've got early bloomers, late bloomers, that you've got some evergreen plants so that you have, some sort of vegetation throughout the year, structural plants. You also want to kind of think about what your rain garden is going to look like in the winter. Maybe you want something with a bit of winter interest as well. So creating the design is really going to help you plan what plants you're going to need, where you're going to plant them. Also, it's going to help you calculate how many plants and how much mulch or amended soil you're going to need. And that's really important to kind of help you stay on track in terms of budget, timing, and so on. So it's really highly recommended that you sort of really plan it out and design it. And it can also be quite a lot of fun. So you may be thinking, oh, I've got clay soil, or I don't think my rain garden would drain very quickly, or there's not that many options of plants that would work. There are actually lots of plants that actually like having wet feet, as you could say. So, I mean, some of the common ones that are often used in rain gardens are like dogwoods, willows, if you've got the space, Louisiana iris. It's not native, but it does love wet conditions. Morning sedge, fox sedge. The sedges are great because not only do they fill spaces up and they give you kind of, long-term sort of presence throughout the year. But in the winter, they're really good for overwintering pollinators, such as solitary bees, because they actually tend to nest in sort of the base of the clumps of these plants. So it's great for biodiversity as well. You also have things like the evergreen inkberry holly, the winterberry holly, which I think has actually been seen growing in the middle of a stream. And even the cranberry is said to really like having wet feet. So lots of options with color, berries. I love the morning star sedge because of its seed pod, you know, really sort of funky textures as well. So you're not limited. There's really a lot of options for plants for rain gardens, and you can play around with it. You're not just planting sort of flowering perennials, though they are a popular choice. So you've got things like here we've got the turtle head. So obviously the turtle head is an amazing plant for pollinators. It's got these kind of crazy like snapdragon like flowers, which are very good for the larger size bees, which are often some of the most sort of endangered species of pollinators. It's broadly tolerant, so it can stand sunny, shady, wet, sandy, clay soils. So it's a great addition. The marsh marigold is another one that really likes wet conditions. It's also tolerant of salt. So if you're having the water running off your drive where there may be a lot of salt, it's a good addition. It's also an early bloomer, so you're going to have some nice pop of color in the spring. Then think about shrubs. You know, you can also go big. Well, go big depending on the size that you have. You don't have to go so big. So you mean here we have an example of the nine bark. There's several varieties of nine bark that all would do very well in a rain garden. Just be careful of the size. Okay, some like the Diablo nine bark can grow like 10 feet by 10 feet, so you would have to have a larger rain garden. But there are also dwarf varieties. So there's like the summer wine, ginger wine, the little devil, and these are often seen naturally growing by the sides of rivers or streams or lakes. So they, you know, they're great additions for your rain garden. The Pointintella is also another great addition. It's very low maintenance and it's great ground coverage. So it's another great shrub. Another thing to think about is adding trees or building a rain garden around your existing trees, especially if you've got sort of drainage issues. A tree, you know, really does absorb a lot of water. So it's, you know, a great complement or addition to a rain garden. Two very cool ones, the bold cypress has these sort of funky roots that come out of the ground and sort of form knees. So that would be great for texture and uniqueness in your rain garden. And you've also got the salmon birch, which loves water, is great for rain gardens, and also has this very cool sort of pink flaking bark that can add a lot of interest to your garden. So lots of options. You also have ferns. Ferns are really great if you've got perhaps a shady situation. They do need a bit of like TLC at the beginning because they are slow to establish. But there's things like the autumn fern, the sensitive fern, the copper fern. They all work really well in shade, and they're going to give your rain garden a bit of sort of evergreen color, you know, something that's going to last throughout the year. So when you're designing, you really want to see, okay, what's it going to look like in the different seasons to ensure you've got a bit of interest throughout. So once you've got it all planned, you know exactly where it's going to go. You've called Ontario one call, so you're within the law. The next thing to do is get some friends round and do the build. So the thing about rain gardens is they are considered a low impact development. Okay, so this is not something that you're going to have to rent bulldozers and diggers and heavy machinery for, unless obviously you're building like a huge industrial sized rain garden. And in fact, you don't want all that heavy machinery because that's going to compact the soil. And the last thing you want to do in a rain garden is compact the soil. You want to keep the basin soil fluffy and light so that it's going to absorb a lot of water. So this is an example from Reap Green Solutions in Kitchener. And one thing to see, for example, in the first picture is the tools that they're using. They're probably tools that most gardeners already have. So a wheelbarrow, spade, shovels, rakes. That's pretty much sort of what you'll need. When you start digging like at the top. So where it's gonna, and then you use the soil, because that's topsoil that you're digging up, to kind of create the berms and the walls around the side. So you may not exactly have to dig 12 inches deep because you can already create the depth by building up your sides. So the idea is to really, keep as much of the soil on the property as possible. That also reduces your carbon footprint and you're not having to ship in and ship out soil. And rather than digging, it's more like scraping and shaping. So it's more of a delicate process, creating this bowl. You kind of want to go for trying to create a flat basin with sloping sides, ideally. And fill it up. So once you've got it, before you start planting and everything, fill it up with water, or if it rains, fantastic, just so that you can check the level, check that you've got no areas that are particularly too deep or too shallow, that it's all level. There are also very cheap leveling tools, or you can just use 2 stakes and a bit of string to make sure that the basin is flat and equal depth all over. So once you've got the shape, then we need to talk about the planting. So a lot of people recommend planting plugs. They don't pack a punch as much as like fully established potted plants, but you have less of a risk of kind of affecting the grade and the level that you've so painstakingly created. Because the problem with potted plants is you can often remove soil, and a lot of times when you plant this, you kind of add more soil from the pot into the rain garden. That's not what you want to do. So the plugs, really, you just kind of dig a hole and slot it in. There's less sort of additional soil that you're adding to your rain garden. Another thing is the yoga planting. So as you can see from picture number 3, everybody's on the edge. This man is even, doing a very sort of strange planting position to reduce the amount of walking on the middle. Because again, you don't want to impact and compact that soil, because the importance is that it's light and fluffy for the water to be absorbed. Mulching, there's a debate. Should you mulch before you plant or after? One of the benefits of mulching before you plant is that actually guarantees that you don't add any more soil, because you would have to dig with a pot by you to remove the soil and then put the plant in. It also reduces compaction of the soil. So it's something worth considering. Another thing with the build is you do need patience. I mean, this is after 3 months, but like the very next day after you've installed your rain garden, it could look a bit bare because you're going to have these plugs and this rock pathway. And it may, for a novice gardener, it may look, oh, it's a lot of empty space. But once you give it like a year and the plants are established, a lot of the times you don't even know it's a rain garden because the plants have taken over. You can't really see where the outlet or the inlet is. It's all kind of, become one beautiful wild garden. So patience is the key there. But that's sort of the build in a very quick nutshell, basically. So just to finish up, because I know I'm running out of time. So I really like this image. So basically the large circle is all the water that we have on planet Earth. The second to large circle, or the medium-sized circle, is all the fresh water. And the tiny, tiny little dot that maybe some of you will be able to see underneath the smaller circle is the water that we have available to us. So that's not frozen, but that's actually in rivers, lakes, and streams. So it's very easy when you live in a place like Halton, very close to the lake, you think water is just everywhere. It's actually a precious commodity. And instead of thinking of water as something that we need to just allow to wash off our properties and go straight down the storm drain and get it off our property, instead of seeing it as a waste product, we really need to start thinking about it as a precious commodity, and how can we harvest and capture as much as possible where it lands to improve our soil, our soil's water content, to replenish underground aquifers, and really to protect our nearby aquatic systems and the creatures living within them, basically. So that's me. If you have any questions, you can of course contact me by email. You can also check us out. There's our website, and you can also just scan the QR code and be taken directly to the website. There's a section on rain gardens there. You can learn about the course and sort of the rain gardens that we've built so far. So
thank you very much. And I think that last image was very, very interesting. And I think people should really take that seriously. There are now water wars in the States because some towns are experiencing drought conditions that are just not ending. So, you know, it's only a matter of time before they come for Lake Ontario. So, you know,
exactly.
We need to protect our water supply. Right, we do have a number of questions. So does it matter the time of year that you do the rain drain test?
Yeah, so ideally, obviously now it's very difficult to do it. Where I am, we're like got several inches of snow. So ideally I would suggest doing it sort of, you know, sort of late spring, sort of March, April, May time. You also don't want to do it in the height of summer when the soil, even if you do pre-fill it, you know, you don't want to do it when the soil is really, really extremely dry. So yeah, I would say sort of springtime is one of the best times to do it.
So you had an example of a rain garden that helped with an icy driveway. So did they end up digging up the walk and putting a downspout underneath? What did they do with that?
I think with him, he just basically, a lot of people have like they create like just kind of he had it running down because his driveway was there, and then he had like the path to his house started. So he just extended his downspout and then just fed it into the lawn, which is what a lot of people do. Or they create like a bit of a channel with stones and sort of river rock on the edge of the lawn, and to then guide the water into the rain garden. Other people I've seen just literally go underneath, like have a pipe system, remove some flagstones and put it underneath. Other people have considered moving the downspout to a different location, or they've done things like the catch basin, which is basically kind of a box drain where the water would fall in, and then it goes down a pipe and pops up somewhere else. And there's a system there, so should it overflow, it has a way to get out, and it doesn't go back to the house. There's lots of ways. There's a really cool one where they're trying to get over like some like a place where they have like the dumpsters and things, and they've created like a metal kind of arch, and it's got like metal salmon, so it looks like salmon jumping upstream. Really cool artwork. Other people use like the arbor, and then they have a rain chain, and that's incredibly beautiful in the winter when that freezes. It really does look, I think, very unique, but that's obviously a question of people's own personal preferences.
And budget.
Yes, and of course budget. Yeah, totally.
Right. So this person has a swale at the front of their house, right between the downward sloping lawn and the paved road. Full sun. Is this a good place for a rain garden? It often fills up with leaves in the fall, and although water pools there, it also slopes away and travels a bit down the street. So they would love to put cranberries there, but don't know if they would survive the salt. That's a very good question. Yes, with the road maintenance.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people have swales. I mean, I'm thinking also from what you're describing, it sounds a bit like what we have in Oakville, where everybody has kind of these swales at the bottom of their garden.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that you have to consider about creating a rain garden there is, I think in some cases that's part of the town.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also a way for water to travel from everybody's property. So you wouldn't necessarily just be getting your water, you might be getting water from the other neighboring properties as well. Swales can definitely be used as part of a rain garden system to guide the water to a rain garden. So if you had like a swale more like in the middle of your lawn, you could certainly use that to kind of create paths for the water to get to your rain garden. It would depend on the specific situations, but I definitely know if it is the one that's at the bottom of people's property, then that is sort of like what everybody's water is running down with. So you would have to really be careful you're not just going to end up with everybody's water, or you're going to block the swale. So those things have to be taken into account.
And be careful of town property, because they have the right to dig that up at any time.
Yeah, so you could create this beautiful rain garden, and then, you know, the town comes and digs it up, or there's a pipe or something underneath, and they will just dig it up. So that's something to be thinking about.
Right, we have another one. They learned something called curb cut, and if they remember correctly, his name is Brad Lancaster. Cutting the curb of houses in the city to allow rainwater flowing back to lawns instead of going down to the sewer directly and stressing the system. So would Oakville consider this, or do you know any other towns that have?
I have seen it. I have seen examples of this where basically you've got sort of the road edge, and there's kind of an inlet into somebody's garden, and yes, the water would flow into a rain garden. There you really have to check each town's regulations. I think in Oakville it's not possible. As far as I mean, I'm still fairly new to Oakville, but I'm learning that there are a lot of bylaws and things that aren't allowed. So I don't think it's possible, but I have seen it done. And I think it would be a really cool idea for businesses and all sorts. But you would really have to double check with your own sort of governing bodies or authorities to see whether that's possible or not.
Yeah, that's fair enough. All right. So thank you again. If there's any further questions, ask them now in the Q&A or in the chat. It has been a pleasure to have you join us and teach us all about rain gardens.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a lot, there's a lot more to talk about, but hopefully I've given you a bit of a taster so you can, you know, start looking into it. And if you build a rain garden, fantastic, good on you.
And be sure to contact Marianne if you have further questions or photos of, hey, what do you think about this?
Yeah, that's true.
Right. We just have one last question. Flat or deep in the middle? She did address this. It depends on your soil, but I will let you just summarize that one, Marianne.
Yeah. Again, so if you have slow draining soil, what you're wanting to do is a flatter rain garden with larger surface area. So you're thinking more, I was comparing it with bowls, like a pasta bowl, a shallower bowl. If you have well draining soil, good draining soil, then you can go a bit deeper. So you're thinking more of like a cereal bowl. So smaller surface area and a deeper rain garden.
Very good. Thank you again. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us. Our next talk is at 2:30 and it is with Selena Long from Milton Public Library on reimagining community. So please join us in half an hour. So thank you very much, everybody. We will see you soon.
Thank you.